Hey everyone, it's Horror Free for All, and I hope you're doing well today. I have a movie review of a film that I recently picked up at a Big Lots for like $3.99 on Blu-ray, and I heard a lot of things about it. And recently, it got a sequel in 2023 that I'm gonna have to watch after seeing this for the first time ever because I had a blast with this movie. And this film is none other than 2020's Becky. Becky was written by Nick Morris and Ruckus Sky and Lane Sky, and it was directed by Carrie Murnian and Jonathan Millett. I hope I'm saying all those names right. It was a straight to Redbox movie, and I don't know if the sequel is straight to Redbox or if it went straight to Fandango. I think it was a Fandango release. I'm not too sure. But this film fucking ruled, man. And what I heard about this from reviews online or just from friends telling me about it is like, it's the Home Alone movie or reimagining of Home Alone that we've all deserved over the years. If you haven't seen Home Alone, it's a classic John Hughes family movie from 1990, and it spawned a sequel called Home Alone 2 Lost in New York. Both movies starred Macaulay Culkin. It birthed an iconic character in cinema history known as Kevin McAllister. And Kevin's shtick is like forming traps around these two bozo criminals known as Harry and Marv in those films. And the traps are what make those movies so much fun and memorable. Becky is almost like if you took elements from survival horror, like the subgenre, like I Spit on Your Grave, or something like The Last House on the Left, or The House at the End of the Street. Movies like that, and you blended it with Home Alone. And you wouldn't think that that would be the best fit ever, but this film just totally hit it out of the park. I think that the makers of this movie did a phenomenal job. And also another thing, I've never seen a movie with Lulu Wilson in it before, but she was captivating in this role as Becky. And seeing, of all people, Kevin James. Yes, Kevin James from King and Queens. He's been in a bunch of Adam Sandler comedy movies. Him playing a villain in this movie was insane. And not to mention, I was not expecting the blood and gore effects to be as good as it was. This was so much fun that I cannot wait to see The Wrath of Becky, which I heard is even better than this movie. So that's saying a lot. Yeah, off the bat, go check this movie out. Go to Big Lots. You can find a copy for $3.99 right now, or I think you can see it online for a pretty reasonable price if you want to rent it or something. I had a blast with this. So what's the concept about? So the movie starts off with a father named Jeff and his daughter Becky are heading to I think a lake house that I think has traditionally belonged to the family. And in this car ride of sorts, you get a background of the story. Now I should kind of mention this beforehand. The beginning of the movie kind of starts off with like a prologue set in the future of Becky by herself talking to some police officers, and it goes back in time 2 weeks prior. So the whole movie takes place in past tense, at least in terms of the timeline of events beginning in the prologue, right? So where I'm going with this is that the dad named Jeff and Becky are in the car ride to the lake house, and Becky is upset about potentially selling the lake house because it meant a lot to her mother. And it seems like Jeff and Becky are, trying to understand each other through this hard time. Becky recently lost her mother to cancer, and Jeff, I think, has a girlfriend who also has her own son, and Becky's also pissed off with that. So Becky, you get the sense that she's kind of lashing out of hurt and out of anger, thinking that her father's going to sell one of the most precious things that tie her to her mother. So Becky's off the bat very sympathetic. And once they arrive at the lake house, the dad reveals that they're going to keep the lake house. And in fact, they're going to try to move there to kind of restart or help restart things. And Becky seems to be happy. But when the father's girlfriend and her son arrive, Becky's mood kind of sours. And I should mention this now because it does play a role. Becky and her father, they have two dogs. One is named Dora, who is, I think, I forget the breed, but it's different from a pit bull. And the other is named Diego, which is a pit bull. Um, and they're both sweet little muscular dogs. And the boy of the girlfriend seems to be attached to Dora, and Becky's dog is Diego. But when they sit down, when they go inside the lake house to hang out, and they, are talking after they make a bonfire, they prepare a bonfire. There's some information dropped to Becky that really upsets her, and that is that the dad plans on remarrying this woman, and kind of, to Becky is going to replace her mother, and that's kind of touching. And I've seen other movies kind of touch on this, but I think it was dealt in a realistic way. She heads out into the woods with her dog Diego, and leaves her soon-to-be stepmother, I guess, and her stepbrother in the house with the dog Dora. And the father goes out to try to talk with Becky before Becky storms off into this art house that's on the property that she spent a lot of time with, or at least her mom spent a lot of time with inside, where she did paintings and stuff. And I should mention this now, there is a converging plot line going on. There's this criminal named Dominic, played by Kevin James, and we see early on in the movie, it's kind of coinciding with the events. He is in prison, and he's being transferred with a bunch of other prisoners, and they have somehow escaped custody, and they break out, steal a bunch of officer uniforms. They flag down a man and his two kids. It's implied that two kids do get harmed by these criminals, which is kind of weird, but that's probably not the most jarring thing you're going to see in this movie, unfortunately. And Dominic beats the shit out of his dad, presumably kills him and steals their car. And he's after something that is inside of this lake house. Now, this part of the story is kind of, muffled over, because I don't think it's ever quite explained, but the criminal Dominic might have once owned the house or have been affiliates with people who were in the house, and he stashed away this key that holds apparently a shit ton of money somewhere, and he needs this key to be able to go get that money. So he arrives at the house in a new disguise with his cronies. Right at the moment where Becky goes off into the art studio cabin out on the property, and the dad walks back inside with his fiance now, I guess, and his soon-to-be stepson and the dog Dora. And the criminals come inside, and they basically, try to rough him up a little bit. And the mom and the stepson try to escape, and they kind of talk this giant teddy bear. He's a big muscular guy, and he's, an integral part to the plot, at least. They try to coach him to be, let them free and don't hurt them. And he actually gives them the cue to leave. And the woman, her son, and the dog Dora go out into the woods, but they interact with two other cronies. And you see the dog Dora get shot down. I'm not kidding. It's not a real animal death, trust me. There is credit saying no animals were harmed. They put makeup effects on this dog to make it look like it got shot to death. But they killed this dog, and they forced the mom and son back into the house with Becky's father. Meanwhile, Becky hears what's going on and starts to understand the gravity of the situation. So she tries to keep Diego quiet. She goes back to the house and starts to spy. And she realizes that, there was some type of miscommunication where they think that Becky was a dog. But then because Becky was spying, she tried to get something out of her room, which leads to that secret compartment of the house that this criminal went to. And the criminal noticed that the key was gone, and notices that there's some girl stuff strewn across the room. He assumes that Becky might hold this key that he's after, or found the key, and grills the father about it and brings him outside. And the father is played by Joel McHale. I should have mentioned that already, but if I haven't, I'm sorry. He gets killed in a pretty tragic way, and Becky sees this in front of her own eyes, and now she's lost both of her parents, and she's become an orphan almost instantaneously. And this awakens a demon within this girl, and for the rest of the movie, man, she goes on a vengeance bloodbath. So after she sees her father die, she goes straight back to the art studio that the criminals don't know is there. And she starts coming up with plans and gearing up for war and grabbing some weapons and stuff. And almost immediately after that, she kills a guy graphically with a sharpened ruler. Oh my lord, that was one of the coolest kills I've seen in a movie in some time. And later on, there's a scene on a boat dock where she stabs a guy with a plank with nails and makes him like injured, and then she throws him into the water. She gets on a boat, uses a boat motor to cut him up. That was fucking brutal. And then she gets into a fight with the big muscular guy later on, who, you know, almost like really hurts her. But then later on, she finally gets back at this Dominic guy by using a lawnmower. And then she gets a gun, and even though the muscular guy was trying to do right by her, she gets some vengeance on him. And I basically just blew through the events of Becky, but there's also some other stuff going on where Dominic, he has this injury by Becky pretty early on, right after her father dies, and she screams. Dominic comes up to her to try to get the key, and she stabs him in his eye. And there's a whole fucking scene where you see Kevin James's eye like bulging out of his head, and they have to cut it out with scissors. It was fucking graphic as shit. And then I guess her father's girlfriend, I think, got shot in the leg or something, and she was like being watched after by the big muscular guy, and they had this connection throughout the movie that is kind of touching. And it's kind of sad that the big muscular guy had to go. But it was definitely needed in terms of Becky's story arc, because she was out for blood, and killing all of them was retribution, because this is in vein of like the I spit on your grave formula. But it's also using not necessarily traps like Kevin McAllister would do, but she utilizes her surroundings and kind of plans ahead what she's going to do to these people like a Kevin McAllister would. So like I said, it's like a perfect blending of that. Becky's like some 13, 14-year-old girl doing all this, so you can only imagine the trauma that's going on, right? So then after, you know, the whole thing settles down, she, you know, makes sure that her father's girlfriend and her son were okay. And then the movie kind of ends on her in police custody, kind of talking about the events. And they're all struck that Becky was able to do that, and she goes pretty much like, she acts like she didn't care and that she would do it again if she had to, and she's holding the key around her neck, kind of like bragging to the audience in a meta way, that she held on to that key and didn't back down to these criminals, and she's proud of herself, even though she just went through a fucking very harrowing story. And yeah, that's essentially what you're going to expect out of Becky. There are a lot of small things that kind of add up in this movie I don't want to spoil for you. I did kind of give away basically the entire plot in that review, but I did so in a way so that way you can kind of know what you're going to expect with this. It's more of a ride than a story. But even though the story is very touching there, it's the ride of this movie and the experience that you have to, you know, indulge in. So I didn't want to give away too much of the experience, but just give you a little highlight points of it. So let's start off with the positives with this movie. Honestly, I think I have no negatives with this film, if I'm being honest, even though there are, I mean, I do, and I'll get into that in a minute, actually. I do have a negative. But start off with the positives. The acting performances in this movie were excellent. The setting, it being like a lake house, you don't really get to see much lake, and it's set in the woods, mostly. But there's some type of weird atmosphere that strangely works. I mean, you do have the lake setting here and there. Like I said, there was a boat kill utilizing a boat motor. But yeah, this movie just has this weird ambiance to it. And for a survival horror movie, it was very thrilling in terms of how it set up its story. It was very well put together in terms of its story narrative and setting up characters and characterizing Becky and her father and the girl, you know, his girlfriend and her son in a very quick manner. Also characterizing the villains throughout the film, which was very nice to see. The gore and practical effects were amazing in this movie. I will say this, though. There are some hard-to-watch moments that some people might get really pissed off at. And that is essentially violence towards animals. There are a lot of scenes involving that. Two of the biggest examples I can say is obviously the Dora, one of the dogs, gets tragically killed by some of these villain characters. So if you're like very touchy on animal violence in movies, you should know about that before you go into it. And another thing is the dog Diego gets hit around a couple of times by these villains and pretty much hurt, and it's kind of hard to watch. It makes me sad because as an animal lover and as an animal owner, I don't like to see that done to animals. But I think in terms of the story, it's just one loss after another, and Diego at the end of the day became Becky's last remaining family member in some morbid way, which is very sad. But I think it works. So I can let the animal abuse and the depiction of animal violence kind of slide here, but it is there. I will say this: the tension of this movie builds like a Home Alone, and that's what's familial about it. And in a lot of ways, this is just straight up a blood-soaked Home Alone. And I love it for that. I love how just bonkers it can be at times and how over the top the kill sequences are. And how Becky becomes more progressively unhinged as the movie goes along. You can tell that by each kill that she commits, she gets more numb to the pain of what's happened to her, and she just becomes full on like she's essentially become like a professional hunter at this point, and she just doesn't give a shit if she wins or loses. She just wants to make sure that these fuckers pay. And it was an awesome narrative to witness through and through. It's just a movie that I will definitely revisit in the future, and I hope that if Wrath of Becky is as good as people say and even better than this, that it goes more bombastic than this film did. Now, I will get into, I guess, my main negative with this and kind of small nitpicks I'm not going to deduct on now. One thing about this movie that actually bothers me is the context of the villains. It's not really explained into exactly why they're at this house for the key, and it's so mulled over that I had to kind of rewatch points to see if they actually touched on it, and it's so brief that if you blink, you miss it. I feel like the villain's tangibility of being there isn't the greatest thing fleshed out. And I will say there are points in the movie, this is more of a nitpick thing, that kind of just prolong characterization, and we do have to kind of wait for the action to get going. Now, I will say this, in some sequences, the only sequence I can see CGI involved is the lawnmower sequence near the end. And that does have some mild CGI blood and some off-screen things, because I think they were going for an R rating, and if they would have shown that lawnmower kill as graphic as it could have been, this would have probably gotten an X rating. So, yeah. But nonetheless, yeah, despite those issues, like, weird CGI moments, some mild pacing issues at points of the film, just getting into too much characterization and not enough action when the movie starts to get more action oriented, and of course the villain backstory being kind of muddled over. I had a blast with this movie. Honestly, this is one of my favorite films I've seen in a long time. I cannot wait to watch the sequel of this. From a 0 to 5 star basis, y'all, honestly, I'd probably give this a 4.75 out of 5 stars. This is a really high movie for me. It's not going to be that high for everyone. I think that this itch to scratch I've been looking for forever. This is the Home Alone reimagining / Home Alone sequel we've all deserved for many years. After seeing box office bomb after box office bomb, or I want to say box office bomb, but just straight to video bomb, that is Home Alone 4, the Home Alone 5, Home Sweet Home Alone, the 6th one. Getting this and a sequel that is more adult and bloodier and way better than the original Home Alone and Home Alone 2, in my opinion, is incredible. It's an absolutely incredible movie, and it deserves all the praise it gets. So yeah, that's my thoughts on Becky. Go check this movie out if you haven't seen it. And if you have seen it, do you love this or do you hate this? I'm dying to know. I'll see you next time.